The first sound was not a gunshot. It was a scream that cut through the darkness like something alive. Then came the thud of boots, hundreds of them, rushing forward across wet ground. Men were shouting, steel clanged, and somewhere ahead a whistle shrieked. In the next second, the night exploded. A wall of fire lit the trees, and the air filled with a storm of metal. 1,000 steel pellets tore through the charging line, and the attack that was meant to overwhelm the defenders collapsed in seconds. You can almost feel the shock in that moment. The attackers expected fear. Instead, they ran straight into something far worse. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. It was the night of May 26, 1944, near Biak Island in the Dutch East Indies. The humid air hung heavy over the jungle, and the ground was slick from earlier rain. American forces of the 41st Infantry Division had landed days earlier and were pushing inland toward the Mokmer Airfield. The terrain was brutal. Coral ridges, dense jungle, and narrow trails made every step slow and dangerous. Japanese defenders had been preparing positions for weeks, hiding in caves and dugouts along the high ground. Both sides knew the fighting would be close, sudden, and unforgiving. Private First Class Daniel Ruiz of the U.S. Army was lying behind a shallow trench line, his cheek pressed against the stock of his weapon. He could hear movement in the darkness ahead, not random, organized, intentional. Officers had warned them that a night charge was likely. The defenders were stretched thin, and the attackers knew it. Ruiz gripped the cold metal of his shotgun tighter. It was not the weapon he trained with back home. But here, in the jungle, at night, at close range, it was one of the most feared tools on the battlefield. A few hundred yards away, Japanese infantry of the 222nd Infantry Regiment were preparing to advance. Their commander, Captain Hiroshi Takeda, had received orders to push American forces back from the ridge before dawn. Ammunition was low. Supplies were worse. The only option left was speed and surprise. The plan was simple. Move fast, close the distance, overrun the line before the defenders could react. At 1:40 a.m., the signal was given. A whistle blew. The charge began. From the American position, the first sign was movement in the tree line, then shadows, then shapes, dozens, then hundreds. Boots struck the ground, branches snapped, and the sound of men shouting grew louder. If the defenders opened fire with rifles and machine guns, but the attackers kept coming. They were too close, too fast, and too many. That was when the shotguns fired. The blast from Ruiz's weapon shook his shoulder. The muzzle flash lit the trench for a split second. The pellets spread wide as they travelled, tearing through the front ranks. He pumped the action, fired again, and felt the recoil slam into his chest. Around him, other soldiers did the same. The air filled with thunder. Each shot sent a swarm of steel pellets ripping through the darkness. Japanese soldiers at the front of the charge suddenly stumbled, dropped, and scattered. The effect was immediate and brutal. At close range, the shotgun did not behave like a single bullet. It hit like a wave. One blast could strike several men at once. Those behind them slowed. Confused by the sudden collapse of momentum, the charge began to lose its shape. Captain Takeda tried to push forward, shouting orders, but visibility was almost zero. The flashes from the American line blinded his men. The noise was overwhelming. Machine guns hammered from the flanks, rifles cracked from behind cover. And between them, the repeated roar of shotguns kept cutting gaps in the advancing formation. You can almost hear the panic building in those seconds. Men who expected a quick breakthrough were now trapped in open ground. Some tried to rush forward faster. Others dropped low, searching for cover that did not exist. The jungle floor offered little protection. The defenders had the advantage of position and preparation. Staff Sergeant Walter Briggs, positioned near the centre of the line, and had ordered his squad to hold fire until the attackers were close. He knew their rifles would be more effective at range, but the real power would come when the enemy closed in. When the charge reached within 30 yards, he gave the signal. Shotguns and automatic fire erupted at once. The front of the assault disintegrated. Japanese soldiers who had survived the initial blast tried to push through the gaps, but each step forward exposed them to more fire. Steel pellets tore into uniforms, equipment, and exposed skin. The sound was different from rifle fire. It was heavier, sharper, and more chaotic. It struck multiple targets at once, and the psychological impact was immediate. Some attackers froze, others hesitated. That hesitation spread through the line like a ripple. The charge, which relied on speed and unity, began to break apart. Behind the front ranks, soldiers struggled to understand what was happening. They could hear the blasts, see men falling, and feel the air tearing with metal fragments. The jungle amplified every sound. The echo made it feel like fire was coming from every direction. Captain Takeda realized the attack was failing. He tried to regroup his men, but communication was impossible. The noise swallowed every command. He pushed forward himself, determined to reach the American line, but the distance never seemed to close. At 1:47 a.m., only minutes after the charge began, the battlefield had turned into chaos. American machine gunners on the ridge added sustained fire. Tracer rounds cut bright lines through the darkness, marking the paths of bullets. Mortar teams, already prepared, began dropping rounds just beyond the advancing formation, trapping the attackers between explosions and gunfire. The Japanese line fractured into small groups. Some kept advancing, others dropped back. Many were caught in between. Private Ruiz could feel his hands shaking as he reloaded. The smell of burned powder filled the trench. The noise never stopped. He fired again, saw figures stumble, and fired once more. He was not thinking about tactics or strategy, only survival. The defenders were not fearless. They were exhausted, scared, and outnumbered. But they had one advantage. They were dug in, and they knew exactly where the enemy had to come from. The attackers had lost that advantage the moment the charge stalled. By 1:52 a.m., the momentum was gone. The remaining Japanese troops began to withdraw, dragging wounded, only trying to regroup in the darkness. The American line held steady, firing in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition. The sudden silence that followed felt unreal. Smoke drifted through the trees. The jungle seemed to close back in around the battlefield. The ground was littered with equipment, dropped weapons, and signs of a fight that had lasted less than 15 minutes, but felt like hours. Sergeant Briggs moved along the trench, checking his men. Some were shaken, some were wounded, but the line had held. The role of the shotgun in that defence became clear in the hours that followed. In close jungle combat, where visibility was low and engagements happened at short range, its impact was devastating. Each blast sent dozens of steel pellets outward, thus increasing the chance of hitting multiple targets and breaking tightly packed formations. For the attackers, it created something they did not expect. Not just physical damage, but sudden disruption. The charge depended on confidence, on speed, on the belief that once the line was reached, the defenders would collapse. Instead, the front ranks had been stopped instantly. Captain Takeda later regrouped his surviving troops deeper in the jungle. Reports described confusion, heavy losses, and a breakdown in coordination. The attack had been planned to overwhelm through numbers, but the terrain and the defenders' preparation turned it into a narrow approach under concentrated fire. The psychological effect lingered. Soldiers who had rushed forward with determination now understood the danger of those close-range weapons. The noise, the flashes, and the sudden collapse of men around them had shattered the rhythm of the assault. Back on the American line, dawn revealed the full picture. The ground ahead showed where the charge had slowed, broken, and stopped. Officers analysed the positions, the firing patterns, and the timing. They realised how critical those first minutes had been. If the attackers had reached the trench line in strength, The outcome could have been different. Hand-to-hand combat in the jungle often erased the advantage of preparation. But the concentrated fire at close range, especially from shotguns, had prevented that moment from happening. It bought time for machine guns to adjust, time for mortar teams to respond, time for defenders to stay organised. The battle for Biak Island continued for weeks after that night. Fighting moved through caves, ridges and dense jungle. Each position had to be cleared slowly. Every step forward came with risk. But that failed charge marked a turning point for that sector. It showed how defensive preparation, terrain awareness and weapon choice could change the outcome of an engagement in seconds. Private Ruiz later described the moment in simple terms. He remembered the sound, the flashes, and the sudden stillness after the firing stopped. He did not talk about heroism. He talked about fear, focus, and the instinct to hold the line. Sergeant Briggs emphasized discipline. He believed the decision to hold fire until the attackers were close had made the difference. Shooting too early would have revealed their positions and reduced the effectiveness of their weapons. Timing mattered. Captain Takeda faced a different reality. His unit had followed orders, executed a charge, and met prepared resistance. In the jungle, information was limited. Decisions had to be made quickly, and sometimes even well-planned attacks collided with unseen defences. You can almost imagine standing there after the fight, the air still heavy, the ground scarred, the silence pressing in after so much noise. Both sides had learned something that night. Speed alone was not enough. Numbers alone were not enough. Preparation, positioning, and understanding the terrain could reshape a battle in minutes. The shotgun, often seen as a simple weapon, proved its value in that environment. At close range, in tight spaces, it delivered impact that disrupted formations and forced attackers to slow down. That slowdown created opportunities for other weapons to take effect. It was not just about firepower, it was about how that firepower was used. As the campaign moved forward, similar defensive tactics appeared in other engagements across the Pacific. Units adapted to jungle warfare, using terrain, concealment, and coordinated fire to hold positions against sudden assaults. Each fight added new lessons. Each survivor carried memories of moments when everything happened at once. The charge on May 26, 1944, remained one of those moments, not because it lasted long, but because of how quickly it changed, from a coordinated push to a fractured retreat, from confidence to hesitation, from momentum to stillness. The men who stood in that trench did not think of history. They thought of the next second, the next shot, the next movement in the dark. And when the charge came, they responded with what they had, where they were, using what they knew. The result was not just a tactical success, it was a reminder of how fragile momentum can be in war, how quickly a plan can break, how a single line holding steady can reshape the outcome of a fight. Even years later, veterans remembered the sound first, not the visuals, not the strategy, the sound, the roar of multiple shotguns firing together, the echo in the jungle, the sudden quiet afterward. It stayed with them, because in those seconds, everything was decided. The attackers expected fear. Instead, they met resistance that did not move. And when 1,000 steel pellets tore through the night, the charge that was meant to crush the line collapsed before it could reach it. But the story did not end with that failed charge. The fighting on Biak grew harsher in the days that followed. Japanese units shifted tactics, moving into cave systems carved into the coral ridges. These positions were almost invisible from the outside and nearly impossible to destroy from the air. American patrols had to advance slowly, clearing each opening by hand, often under fire from hidden defenders who refused to surrender. Temperatures during the day climbed past 90 degrees. At night, the jungle trapped heat and humidity, making sleep almost impossible. Supplies moved slowly across muddy trails. Water had to be rationed. Ammunition had to be carried by hand. Every movement required effort, planning and patience. And Lieutenant Robert Hale of the 162nd Infantry Regiment later wrote that the real enemy was not always the men shooting back. It was the terrain. Every ridge blocked vision. Every tree line hid danger. A position that looked empty could suddenly erupt with gunfire. The memory of the night charge stayed with the unit. Soldiers checked their shotguns more often. Ammunition belts were reorganized. Machine gun positions were adjusted to create overlapping fields of fire. Officers drilled their men on what to do if another charge came through the darkness. They were preparing for the next moment, not celebrating the last one. Across the ridge, Captain Takeda's surviving troops adapted as well. They avoided open charges and focused on ambushes, using narrow trails and hidden tunnels to move without being seen. Night patrols became more cautious. Point scouts listened before they moved. Every sound mattered. War in the jungle punished mistakes instantly. Days later, another skirmish erupted near the same sector. This time it was smaller, quieter, and more controlled. A group of Japanese soldiers attempted to probe the American line, testing for weak points. They moved slowly, using the terrain for cover. But the defenders were ready. Flares lit the sky, and coordinated rifle fire forced the attackers back before they could close the distance. The lesson from the earlier charge had changed both sides. Direct assaults were replaced by careful movement. Speed gave way to caution. Confidence turned into calculation. The Americans continued pushing toward Mokmer Airfield, knowing its capture would allow Allied aircraft to control the skies over the region. But each step forward meant another engagement, another defensive position to overcome. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Medics worked constantly behind the lines, treating wounds, managing infections, and keeping exhausted soldiers on their feet. Engineers cleared paths, built supply routes, and reinforced defensive positions. The fight was not just about bullets and explosions. It was about endurance. Private Ruiz survived the campaign, but he carried the memory of that night for the rest of his life. He remembered the sound of boots in the dark before the charge even began. He remembered the weight of the shotgun in his hands. And most of all, he remembered the moment when fear almost took control and discipline held it back. Sergeant Briggs was later promoted. Officers credited his decision to hold fire and maintain order during the charge as a key factor in stopping the attack. He never described it as bravery. He called it training, instinct, and trust in the men beside him. Captain Takeda's unit continued to fight in the jungles of Biak, but their strength never fully recovered. Supply shortages, constant pressure, and the loss of momentum after failed assaults forced them into defensive positions for the remainder of the campaign. By August 1944, Allied forces had secured the island, but the memory of that night remained one of the most intense moments for the soldiers who were there. It was not a massive battle. It did not last for hours. It did not involve tanks or aircraft roaring overhead. It was a sudden clash in the dark, a few hundred yards of jungle, minutes of chaos, and a defensive line that refused to break. You can almost stand there now, hearing the insects return after the gunfire, feeling the thick air pressing against your skin, sensing the tension that never fully disappeared even after the shooting stopped. The jungle never truly went quiet. Every shadow could hide movement. Every sound could mean danger. That is what made those nights unforgettable. Not the scale, but the closeness, the immediacy, the knowledge that survival depended on seconds. And in those seconds, when 1,000 steel pellets tore through the night and shattered a charging force, the outcome was decided before the attackers could even reach the trench. It was a moment where preparation met instinct, where discipline overcame fear, and where a defensive line, thin and exhausted, held firm against a sudden storm of men and steel. History often remembers the big battles, the massive offensives, the turning points marked on maps. But sometimes the war is shaped in the dark, in places few people ever see, in moments that last less than 15 minutes, moments where everything depends on who holds their ground. And that night on Biak Island, in the thick jungle before dawn, the line held. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.